Hello, everyone, and welcome to I Am Not Okay with Day. I am your host, Day. And today we are joined by a special guest, someone that I am very, very excited to be here on the podcast, Heather Thompson Day.
Yay.
Yay! Heather, if you guys are not aware, is an interdenominational speaker. She is an author. She's a contributor to Religion Newsweek Service, Christianity Today, Newsweek, and the Barna Group. She is a professor of communication at Andrews University. She is the host of Viral Jesus, one of my favorite podcasts.
Oh.
And she runs an online community called I'm That Wife. She is a wife, she is a mother, and she's here joining us to talk about one of my favorite books, y'all. It's Not Your Turn. And so I'm very, very excited. Welcome, Heather, to the podcast.
It is an absolute honor to be here with you.
I appreciate that so much. So, when I first reached out to you, I told you that your book was literally attacking me because I felt like I was going through a time where I really needed to hear those words, but I also really needed to hear those words. And so it's one of those things where it's hard, but it's also
Mm.
so necessary. And I was thinking about talking about waiting. So my podcast is called I Am Not Okay because I went through a divorce 2 years ago, and I was having
Mm.
a really hard time with going through the emotions, just like healing. I was in therapy. My therapist was telling me, "Why are you so resistant to like your feelings?" And all of that came crashing down. One day I woke up I was in this like half sleep, half awake state, and I felt the Lord talking to me, telling me, "You are not okay and you need to
Mm.
talk about it." And that's kind of the birth of this podcast. So I've kind of started it as, me healing, talking about the journey, not being on the other side, but like talking about the things as I'm going through it.
Yeah.
And so a few months ago, I kind of entered into this waiting period. And I was thinking about the podcast and I was like, I need to talk about this, but I don't know what to do or like how to approach this because I'm in the heart of this. I don't have the answer. And so I was thinking about who I could talk to. And my friend had recommended your book to me
Mm.
last year, actually. And as soon as like stuff started happening in my life, I picked it up and I started reading it. And I cried. Like there was the chapter about surrender. I started bawling.
Mm.
And I thought, you're the perfect person to talk about this with, but you're kind of a lot bigger than I am. So I was like, I don't know if she'd be able to do it. But then one day, again, I felt the Lord saying, just send the message, see what happens. I did. Thankfully, you responded. And so I'm so happy that we can talk about this because this is still relevant for me. I think
Mm.
I'm still going through it. And so
Yeah.
I would love to hear, from someone who's been through it, kind of come out on the other side, your experience. So I guess the first thing I really want to know is what was the inspiration behind It's Not Your Turn?
Yeah. So I talk about this in chapter 1. I just want to say though, too, so I think the perception is that you're going to get to another side. And I
Mhm.
think there is like all that happens is life keeps changing, right?
Mhm.
The season absolutely changes, but also as far as whatever our perception of the other side is, I
Mm,
just want to
mhm,
say the goalposts will keep moving.
mm. Thank you for saying that because I think that was kind of my problem in the very beginning is like you think I'm going to get healed one day. And so then
Mm.
you kind of go through life with this expectation of like what that's going to look like. Then it never
Yes.
happens and you get disappointed. So I really appreciate you clarifying that. 'Cause I think that's really important, not just for me to hear right now, but I think for a lot of people listening.
And healing is a process,
Yes.
right? So there are going to be good days and then there are going to be bad days. And that doesn't mean that you are not further
Right.
in the process.
Hmm.
Right. So I just think I think it's very important as kind of the backdrop to this conversation that we're going to have to give ourselves permission to be wherever we are,
Yeah.
because it's not going to be a linear process where now I'm here. All that happens let's just say, if the prayer for somebody is, I just got to get out of this apartment and I need to get into a house. That's it.
Mhm.
That's all. I just want my own house. I need to own my own house. And I'm working so hard toward that goal. Well, then you get the house.
Right.
And I'm telling you what eventually will happen. A, you have to clean it. Right. So that's one thing. But then
Right.
also, like, you'll start looking at the neighbors' houses. And now what happens is your perception of the neighborhood starts to change.
Mhm.
Your perception of how your house that you once at one time were just dreaming, if I could just get the house, that's all that matters. But now I'm looking at all the neighbors and I'm looking at how
Right.
much bigger their house. And do people think my house is the smallest house in this block? What are people?
Mm.
That's all often that happens. And so I just want to say, as a backdrop to people, to whatever it is that you're waiting on, I don't know, outside of like a deep, for me, it has truly been like a deep surrender to God of like, it doesn't, may I not dream dreams that are different from your dreams
Mhm.
for me. That's kind of where you're going to get your semblance from. I can, at this point in my life, I can sit, and I'm in a season right now where I'm waiting on some things, and I can wait in a different mentality than I did even when I wrote It's Not Your Turn, because the difference I think now is I'm okay with no.
Mm. Wow.
I'm okay with it because I don't want, the last thing I ever want is to be in a space that God didn't actually call me to. For
Yeah.
me personally. Now, this might not be true for everybody. And I think the majority of people will force their way into whatever space they want to be in that God didn't necessarily call them into, but I'm going to make a way for myself. I just don't want that. So, Lord, if, and this is the prayer that I often pray, if that's not what you have for me, then please change my heart that I can accept it and allow my heart. This is what I pray almost every day. Please allow me to be still soft toward
Mm.
you, toward myself, and toward other people in this season that I'm in. I just want to keep my heart from hardening from these experiences. Okay. So that's the backdrop. I wrote the book because I had been applying for jobs and I could not get one. I could not get a full-time job in academia to save my life. I applied literally, I don't even know how many applications I sent out. I think I had a couple interviews, but no offers. And I felt like I had done everything right in my life.
Mhm.
And so I thought my understanding was, if you do the right things and
Right?
I behave in the right way, the Lord, of course, is going to open the right doors. Well, it was shocking to me to realize that that wasn't happening. And at the exact same time, one of my best friends in the entire world, her name is Jewel Jones, who had not made all those same right choices, got this dream job. She called me one day and she said, Heather, you're not going to believe it. And I said, what? She said, I just got hired by NASA. And I was like, wow,
Yay.
yay, you, yay, you. And I was sincerely happy for her. I absolutely adore her. She deserves it. She's an amazing person. But I also immediately felt sad for myself. And I had to learn how to sit in the juxtaposition of those two emotions. I can be happy for somebody else while being sad for myself. Don't let the sadness for yourself override what this person needs from you in this moment. And I just remember it was like the first time, this would have been probably in 2013 or 14. And it was the first time I
Mhm.
just heard the Holy Spirit say, it's not your turn.
Mm. Mhm.
I can still see myself. I was standing in the driveway. I'm on the phone
Wow.
with her and I heard, it's not your turn, but it's hers.
Mm.
So clap. You clap for her and you be, just because it's not your turn right now doesn't mean it won't ever be, but it's not right now. It's hers. Give her this moment. And so that just became this phrase that I started repeating to myself over and over as I went through various rejections. And for me, it was book publishing and academia. That was the phrase that I kept saying, it's not your turn right now. And that's okay, but it's this person's. How do I show up for them?
Wow. I really love what you were saying earlier about doing all the right things, because I feel
Mm,
like I was in that exact same place. Like I did XYZ. And I think this is a myth. This is one of those things we believe, like if you just do all the right things and everything will work out as they should, right? Or as
yeah.
they need to. I was in that exact same predicament of I did everything right. I got married, I bought a house, I got this amazing job. And now, everything is crumbling down. And yes, like you see everybody succeeding in their marriages in my case, and you think, why? Like, what have I done to like
Yeah.
deserve this? And to hear you say it's not your turn, there's such a negative connotation with that, I
Yeah.
think. It's not your turn. Like, if someone tells me it's not my turn, I'm not going to be like, okay, like, I'm going to protest that. How did you come to this place of like, okay, like acceptance almost, like, it's not my turn?
For me, it actually was a positive statement. So for
Hmm.
me, it was really like, it's not your turn yet.
Yet.
I never thought it's not your turn ever. I just
Mhm.
had to say to myself in this moment, in this season, it's just not your turn. And that's okay. It is not ever going to be somebody's perpetual turn. That's not life. A really
Mhm.
great book I just read is Wintering by Catherine May. And she talks about this idea of wintering as like a metaphor for depression. And she says
Mhm.
life is never a perpetual summer, just like the earth is not ever perpetual summer. You go through seasons and it's actually really good for the soil. There are actually germs and insects and things that have to be killed
Mm.
in the coldest of winter. And so, how do we stop resisting the season that we're in? What happens when I stop being sad about being sad?
You just are. You just are.
You just are. And when I stopped resisting my seasons, that's when all of a sudden I just came into this new space. Not that you love it, but it's like
Right.
it's winter. So, what do you do in the winter? You get a book and you don't go out that much. And you curl up on the couch more, and I drink more tea. I take care of myself more because, oh my gosh, it's winter. How do we just stop trying to wear a bathing suit outside? It's winter, right? How do we start just we need winter more season? I know season is never going to last. It will keep changing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the problem that a lot of us have in the waiting season is this idea that it will never happen. Because I think I felt that myself. When I hear it's not your
Right.
turn, what I hear is it's not your turn and it's never going to be your turn, right? I don't hear it's
Hmm.
not your
Hmm.
turn yet. And so I think that's the struggle sometimes, is that when you can't see it right in front of you, or, even in like the short distance, you start thinking, well, I guess it's just never going to happen for me, you know? I think
Day,
it's
can I tell you what you have to have? You have to have other people with you. You
mm,
have to have a community of people. It doesn't have to be, I'm against like, you have to have a tribe. I don't think you need a tribe. You need 2 to 3 people, and one can be mom. You
yeah.
need 2 to 3 people who see a future for you that you can't see for yourself.
Mhm.
I am telling you, in the book, I talk about my relationship with my friend Bimbo.
Yeah.
She has always been my spiritual person that sees and she believes it. She's not like just gassing me up. She believes it. And she was able to see things in my life that I could not see for myself because I only saw my circumstances. My husband has this great analogy about faith. And he says faith is literally like putting on binoculars so that you
Mhm.
can see what is actually in the distance as if it's right here. And so people
Mm.
will look at you saying, why are you living this way? That it's not even here right now, but it's like you're wearing binoculars. No, I see that which is in the distance as if it were right here. And I just have to say that to myself, put your binoculars on
Yeah.
right now and look at the situation. But that is, I think it is very difficult to do that alone. It becomes much more sustainable when you have other people looking at you saying, I don't think you're going to be in this situation forever.
Mm.
I'm
Mhm.
telling you, when I pray about it, when I look at you, when God, I have felt the Holy Spirit tell me this is going to change. And man, I love the idea of believing things for other people. It's
Yeah.
what sustained me.
Yeah. Actually, so I'm a therapist, actually.
Okay.
And I tell that to my clients all the time. You don't have the hope,
Mm.
I'll put the hope on the shelf for you. Right. And so that's something too that I do with my best friends as well. And so I love just the idea of not doing this thing alone. Because that's the
Yes.
thing about waiting too, is that you feel
Yes.
like you're waiting alone. And
Yes.
everybody's moving ahead and everybody's like, and it's just you. And that's not the case.
We should fight to make it not the case. And
Yeah.
some of that is having the vulnerability to let other people know how
Mhm.
hard this is. Because sometimes people, and of course, we all know this, when I'm going through my own stuff, I am the worst friend to other people because all I see is me.
Right.
It takes a conscious person to step outside of that. Right. So that's we have to be able to be vulnerable to tell our friends who maybe aren't consciously stepping outside of that. These
Mhm.
are some of the things I'm hoping to get out of this relationship right now. I need
Yeah.
somebody to see this for me.
Mhm, mhm. Coming back to the idea of waiting, what do you think are some of the challenges that even like our generation, you talk a lot about being a millennial, which I thoroughly relate to. What are some of the challenges that we're facing today just with waiting, with the idea of waiting?
Yeah. So here's the big one. I really truly believe who you are when it's not your turn is actually more important than who you will be when it is.
Mm, mhm,
It is not hard for me, and it doesn't
mhm,
take character and it doesn't take integrity for me to turn my podcast button on anymore when I know I'm going to have thousands of downloads. It's not hard. What was hard was turning the podcast button on when I didn't know if 100 people were going to listen. That took character
yeah,
and it took integrity. And God was actually shaping something in me back then. Right. And so I am concerned as a person of faith about a generation that is unwilling to wait.
mm,
Because the most important things that are happening in our character, I promise you, are happening in that space. Your life doesn't start at some metaphorical there.
right.
Life truly does start right now, right here. And I can remember the moment that I had this shift in my life where I just started saying, I'm going to start doing things. I'm not at an Ivy League school. I don't have a book deal. I don't have I don't have any of the things that I thought I would have, but I'm going to start teaching the class that I do have. I'm going to be faithful with what's in my hand. I'm going to teach that class as if it's the most important thing I'm ever going to do in my entire life.
Mm, mhm,
And I mentally, just before I stepped in the room, I would always say, God, I'm going to choose to believe that you've called me to this. And it's
mm,
incredibly important. And then what happened, my circumstances didn't change, but my life, like I changed. And what's weird is that as I changed and I started dealing with each circumstance differently, it did start to change the situation around me. It wasn't immediate. It was little by little by little by little. So what I would say to somebody who's waiting right now is you have to start paying attention to the little wins. If you keep looking for is it Steve Jobs that said we underestimate what we can do? We underestimate what we can do in 10 years and overestimate what we will do in one.
mm,
Stop looking for a 1 year goal.
right.
Let's look at 10 years. What little changes do I have to make to be in a different space in 10 years? You would start to realize that those little things actually really matter.
Right.
And they can make a huge difference when we're looking 10 years down the line. How do we change the way? I think I say that in the book, right? Don't I talk about the long game? How do we change the way that we look at our own lives? And as I started to believe I'm just telling you before I get on this call, I always have a
Mhm.
conversation with myself where I say, this is Good Morning America. I do. You are going to get on this podcast and you are going to have this conversation as if it's the most important thing, Heather, you will ever do in your entire life, because this is what God has actually placed in your hand. And once
Mm,
I started living my life that way, I changed, but also I was realizing I actually had an impact. When I taught classes with 5 students, but I treated them as if it was the most important thing I was ever going to do, it actually, like, it seemed like it really mattered to them. I
yeah.
started getting all these cards. It's going to make me cry. Like I started to realize that these little things in our lives really, truly matter to other people. If you can get out of yourself and start saying, how can I make a difference around me? I had purpose in my exact same job and circumstance and situation. And once I'm just telling you, once you start to realize how much you actually matter with what
Mm,
God has already placed in your hand, you can't go back. I can't just phone
wow.
it in anymore because I don't know what I'm missing. You see
Mm,
what I'm saying? I've now
yeah.
discovered that it did make a difference, and I can't go back because it would be it would be unfaithful. I would have like squabbled what God had placed in my hand, which actually could have mattered for somebody else's eternity. I can't risk that
Wow.
anymore.
Wow. Wow. This is making me think actually. I got a recent invitation to speak somewhere to out of college to do like they had this mental health happy hour.
Yes.
And when I got that call, my initial reaction is no, what am I going to talk about? I don't know anything. I've been in this profession now for 6 years. I've been a therapist for 6 years and I'm like, I don't know anything. I can't, what am I doing? Like, and my head is like all the self-doubt, right? And my friends kind of going back to that is like, what? Like, you are amazing. Do this. This is a great opportunity. You just never know what's going to open this door.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I did it. And I remember, having a similar conversation with myself of like, you know what? I'm going to go in there, do the best that I can do. Um, and God's going to work. And I remember going in, I did the presentation, and yeah, like it wasn't, hundreds of people there, but the people that were there
Mm-hmm.
were coming up to me and like everybody was like, I need you to be my therapist. What's your card? Like it was all these different things, right? And I was like, wow, this idea of changing the perspective of what
Yep.
you're doing and making it super important, even when there's doubt from self, like taking yourself away from it. And I think that's kind of
Yeah.
been the theme in my life recently too, where there has been a lot of like down because of self and all the things so that are valid. But again, like when you take yourself out of it and you can be fully present for someone else. I mean, like in
Mm.
my darkest moments personally, I have clients telling me, you're the best therapist I've ever had. I've never thought about this way. And my immediate thought is I'm like, I suck. Like I'm horrible right now. I
Right.
can barely, but I intentionally try to be present when I do this. And it's something that has been effective. And so I love that point of like intentionality of every single action that you're doing and knowing that it's actually not about you all the time, because I agree, like that is when the impact is so great.
One of my favorite quotes is Martin Luther King Jr., and he was doing a graduation speech to a group of high school seniors during the civil rights movement. So the world is not their oyster.
Mm,
Opportunity is not. What do you say to a class where opportunity is not opening
right.
itself up to them? And he says, if all you do when you leave here is be a street sweeper, then I want you to sweep those streets with so much passion and so much intention and so much integrity that all of heaven has to stop
Hmm.
and say, oh my God, look at the street sweeper.
Wow.
I want to live my life like that. And remember, if nobody sees you, Christian, heaven sees you. And
Mm,
how much more? Again, it does not take integrity for Taylor Swift to get on the stage at the Eras Tour where there's thousands of people who are already there to cheer for her.
right.
It absolutely takes a person of character to show up in the schoolroom, classroom, kindergarten class for 30 rambunctious kids. And maybe nobody's ever going to say thank you. That's integrity. And
Mm,
how do we start living in a life of integrity between us and heaven and us and ourselves?
hmm.
That's what's become very important to me.
Yeah. I'm actually remembering something you wrote in the book too. I think you were talking about a woman. I think her name is Takiana, is it?
Tatiana,
Tatiana.
Tasi,
Okay,
yeah.
yes. And you were talking about how she is also very intentional about all the people that she meets, right? And actually, I was talking about this with my best friend the other day. And she was saying to me, like, isn't that exhausting where like you are so aware of every single thing, every person that you're coming across. And, you have to kind of like, is it like a being on thing or, and I'm just thinking about this idea too of intentionality as far as every single thing that we do, making every small, big action something so important. Like, what do you say to someone who thinks that that might be a really like exhausting task?
It is. I would say, yes, it absolutely is. I would also say different seasons will allow for different phases of you. So something
Mm,
my therapist says to me is this good enough for where you are right now? And that for me is very relieving, right?
yeah.
It's not about always being perfect. It's about being true to who you are. And how are you showing up in that space with whatever reserves I have? How do I do the best I can with the reserves I have right
Hmm.
now?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it is exhausting. I think life is exhausting. And so I'm way more, I will say I have been way more intentional now about, I don't even like the word self-care, but about my
Mm,
rest. I am way more intentional now, as just as intentional as I am about my work. I'm incredibly intentional about my rest. I schedule my calendar. I feel like, did I talk about this in the book? Don't let other people schedule your calendar. I
hmm.
will block out time in my calendar because if somebody comes into my office unexpected and says, "Are you free on the 11th?" and I see that there's nothing there, I'll be honest. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if I look at my calendar and it has a block there that says rest, I'm like, "Oh, actually no, the 11th doesn't work. I already have something."
Hmm.
It's a rest for myself, but that intentionality is the only way you can survive it.
Mm, mhm.
Be intentional with your rest. Be what fills you up? What does give you energy? So that
Right.
I'll have more energy for the people around me.
Mhm. Pour in, pour out, pour in, pour out.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really good. I love that because that's very practical too. I think you've been posting too a lot on your social media just about the Christian journey too, and how tiring like that can be as well, which I really
Yeah.
love the real picture you're painting. But I think there is again like this false belief that, oh, like if you do this, then it's gonna be like this. You follow Jesus, you have faith. Faith is gonna be this like amazing thing when it's really hard a lot of
Yeah.
times, and even for me, like in the past couple months, I lost my job, and
Oh,
I started a new job. It was really slow, and I can't pay my bills, and there's these like
yeah.
practical things that are happening that I'm like, how are we going to do this? But God continuously works, and He shows us that it's okay. Like I already had it handled. And so I just love the way that you paint that picture of what faith, what walking with Christ really looks like, and knowing that it's something that takes work on both ends. You can't just work, 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 and then think that that's enough. But I think when we think about the Christian journey, there's a lot of like selflessness that happens. So it feels like pouring in sometimes that can feel wrong. You know what I mean? This
Mm,
idea of pouring into yourself when you're supposed to be giving. So, but I think what you're saying here is it's equally as important as pouring out. And
I
so
think
being
it's
intentional
actually
about that
the
is,
only way. I
mhm,
don't want to pour out in a way that makes me resentful.
mm,
I don't even know. I struggle to think that that's Christian. I think there's
which,
a lot of angry, unhappy Christians.
yeah. Yeah, because I'm gonna say that's pretty contrary. It's kind of like the same idea of like, oh, I'm fasting and I'm making up my face and I'm like angry so that everybody can know I'm
Yes.
fasting. Yeah.
Yes. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I want to pour out of my bounty,
Mm,
not my
mhm.
lack. And so some of that is the intentional parts of rest. And I just want to say this too about finances because I've so been there. And I think it's something we don't talk about enough, and I don't mind talking about it. I actually opened the book by talking about my card getting declined on
Yes,
paper
you did.
plates. Yeah,
Yeah.
I used to think that if God was going to show up for me, It was
Mhm.
going to be in a check in my mailbox with no return address, just a mysterious,
Mm.
somebody just somehow money from the heavens just
Fell
drops.
out of the sky.
And that's God's way of showing up for me. And
Yeah.
what I have found is it often is my humility and saying to my sister or to my mom or to my best friend, I'm short $200. Do you
Mhm.
think you can help me this month?
Yep.
And do you want to know what? Like, they've helped me. Is that
Yeah.
not God? Is that not God meeting my need? I just think we keep, as Christians, trying to make it just this relationship between us and God. That it was never the covenant. The covenant
Mhm.
was always relationship with God, relationship with each other. That's the 10 commandments. First four, love God. Last six, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, or love each other, love each
Mhm.
other, love each other, love each other. Your relationship with God is only as strong as your relationship with fellow man.
Mhm.
That's always been the covenant. But we don't, I think, anymore, and it's not our fault. I think it's our culture. Everything
Yeah.
around us is like, do it on your own. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. You
Right.
figure this out. That's not the Christian invitation. That may be like the capitalistic invitation. That is not the Christian invitation. It is that we are to journey together, literally carry one another's burdens, and in doing so, you
Mhm.
fulfill the law of God.
Yeah. I have a little secret to tell you. I read that part in your book in a time when I was very financially struggling.
Mm.
And I had parents who were willing to help and I was like, I don't want to ask them,
I don't, yeah.
And but I did. But what you wrote gave me the freedom to be okay with that. I was
Mm,
always going to have to do it because I literally could not survive without it.
yeah.
But it shifted the way I saw that, like the way that I view asking for help. Because I've also had many people say, if you need anything, you just let me know. And that's God too. Like the fact that you can
Yeah.
have people to say, I'm here, whatever you need, because there are many people who don't have that, unfortunately. And so, yes, I mean, there's so many ways that your book has
And
helped me.
I just want
That's
to
one
tell
of
you,
them.
for me, because
Mhm.
I've spent so much time in that space, I now am so grateful of how sensitive I am to the people around me who may be
Yeah.
struggling financially. I would not, I don't think, be as sensitive to that had I not known what it feels
Mm,
like
to be on the other
to
side.
to genuinely have a negative bank account. Right. I know what that feels like to you. It's to this day. And I haven't had my card decline. I don't even know in how long, at least probably 3 or 4 years for 3 or 4 years. Every time I make a charge, I'm like, I know there's money in there. And I still like
Yeah.
that trauma trigger of, oh
Yeah.
my goodness, is she going to come back and say that just sticks with you. And I'm going to be
Mhm.
honest, like, I never thought I would say this, but several years later now, I'm grateful because I guarantee you it's going to change the way I do ministry for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
And that's why I'm saying who we are when it's not our turn is actually more
Yeah.
important than who you will be when it is, because it changes how you see yourself and the world around you. And I hope it'll make you softer, not
Mhm.
harder.
I actually was reading in this book the other day about the stages, like you hit the stage like we were talking about. You get the job, the house, blah blah. But those are like snippets of life. Those
Yeah.
are like 2 seconds. Like you've achieved the goal, then what? So I think what you're saying too is like the weight is actually majority of the percentage of life, the trials, like the struggles, those are probably most of what happens. And like that's where that growth happens. That's where it needs to happen. So yeah, I really love the reminder that it's something that needs to build character and it's not something
Hmm.
that we should even take lightly, and it's even a privilege, dare I say, to be
We will
willing.
never say that when we're in it, man.
You're correct. Speaking of that, you also talked about delayed gratification.
Mm.
And oh my goodness, I love that study that you had mentioned about the marshmallows, right? Talk to us a little bit more about how we struggle with that delayed gratification and how maybe we can like shift again the view of delayed gratification.
Yeah, I think of it in terms of playing the long game. There are certain things that may bring pleasure in the short term, but I always ask myself, what is the long game here? And I'm
Mm,
thinking
mhm.
specifically for me, there are certain situations, I'm actually in one currently, where it would feel really good to tell somebody what I really think of them right now.
Yeah.
It would feel really good. In fact, I would think it would be called like standing up for myself. But then I
Mm,
think, okay, in the long term, in 10 years, I actually do these internal dialogues. Will this still matter to you in 10 years? If so,
mhm,
then it's probably worth addressing right now. If not, I'm gonna smile and take it and walk away and just
mm,
know that I have my integrity with me.
yeah.
Right. So like, how do you start looking at situations in the long term? Right. If it's that you're waiting on, let's say you're waiting to fall in love again. In the long term, if 10 years from now you are happy, in love, and married, how will that version of yourself wish that you had handled this version right now?
Mm,
And how do you assume that role? I
wow.
think that's part of what faith is. Right? Is saying like, well, what are the things? And this is again, I tell the story of Vimbo. She was my single friend who we every time, I mean, that's what our main prayer over her life was,
Yeah.
praying for a partner. And she absolutely, I just remember like so many times she was like mad saying, this is a joke. Like, I'm so done with this. And even in the book, I told the story of how I told her to get a tie. And I said,
Yes.
just put the tie in your drawer. And I just keep it as a symbol that I really believe God is going to bring you somebody who's going to one day wear that tie. Well, on her wedding, she did, this wouldn't be in the book because this has been since, at her wedding to that same person, she did bring the tie in her pocket
Yeah.
and she shared. And can I tell you, this is actually really, really important. I want to share this. Okay. So at the time, there were so many times and this is years in between when she bought the tie and when she actually found somebody. I mean,
Mhm.
probably 3 or 4 years. Um, at the wedding, she tells the story to everybody there about the tie. And then at the reception, I give a little speech just talking about our prayer journey together. So many people came up to us at this wedding, both of us saying, not Christians, just saying, something God is speaking to me here. I've
Mm,
never been to a wedding where I felt this way. People on her groom's side who have zero relationship with Christianity and the church were
mm.
moved. And her
Wow.
and I on her honeymoon, she calls me and she's like, I just have to like, I almost think she's like, I almost wonder, was part of that weight just because it was really going to matter for like two people in David's family who are going to hopefully have
Wow.
a relationship with God and be in heaven forever and ever and ever because of the testimony that they saw us live. You have no idea what God is bringing you into. You have no idea. But how do we live our lives right now, truly believing I'm just going to choose to believe? And at this point in my life, I've seen it so many times. I know it's true. I may have feelings because you can't
Yeah.
control your feelings, but I know that God wants what's best for me. I know it. He has proved it to me over and over. And I want to tell people listening, don't feel like you can't tell God to prove it to you.
Mm,
I said to God, I have no faith. And I don't think faith is something we build. I think it's something God gives us through
mm.
experiences with him. Little by little by little, you take that experience where he does open the door and you just know this was a God thing. And you use that now in the present situation that I'm in. But there is such a bigger picture that we are never aware of when we're zoomed all the way in on the
Right.
page to like the single word. But what if we zoom all the way out? And what if there's an entire story here of our lives that's being written that perhaps is going to be a story that you tell over and over and Vimbo is going to
Mhm.
tell this story till she dies.
Yeah. It's a beautiful story. It's one of
It
my
is.
favorites. My best friend and I were talking about doing the same thing too,
Do
based on that.
it.
But you're speaking to me right now, Heather. You are speaking to me because at the last episode I recorded, I was in such a dark place. And I was talking about the fact that I was in that place with God where I was like, we're done. Like, no,
Yeah.
you have just done all these things to me. And like, why? Why do these things keep happening? Like, what? Like, I can't. Just the faith. I don't have it. I don't have it. And I think I'm also coming to that belief that he has my best interest at heart. And I think I believe that. I'm starting to really believe that now. But yeah, like in those moments when you feel abandoned, because that's what I was talking about, feeling abandoned by God. I was scared to admit that because I didn't want to go all the way away from him. Something deep down in me that was like, no, you can't go. But I think there's also this thing like that God can't handle me telling him how I really
Mm-hmm.
feel, you know? And so I came to the place where I just didn't have it physically, mentally, spiritually anymore. I said, I can't, like, I just don't have this. And God was there to speak to me through music, my friends, this
Yes.
book. This was the only book I was reading. I said, I'm not going to read the
Mm,
Bible. I'm done with
mm,
that. And I read your book, and it was then that I read the part of surrender that I started crying because I felt like that's God. That was God telling me, that's all you got to do. Just surrender this to me and it'll be okay. And that's kind of like the turnaround, honestly, that has me now in this place of like, okay, I know you have it figured out. 10 years from now, I'm going to be in a better place. Like whether that is like whatever the goal is that's happened or whether that's just mentally and spiritually where I need to be,
mm-hmm,
it's going to
mm-hmm.
be better regardless. And I know this and I'm going to hold on to that and like do the zooming out
But
like you
here's how you
said.
know, Day. When I was having my card declined for my daughter's birthday on paper plates,
Mhm.
was there any idea in my mind that that would be the chapter that I open, the book It's Not Your Turn, that Day was one day going to read and have this conversation with me, telling me it's how she got through her different, no clue.
Yeah.
But would I have lived it all over again to hear you say that to me?
Mm.
Absolutely. And that's how I know he has our best
Yeah.
interest at heart. And I'm telling you, one day you are going to sit across from somebody and you're going to say, I know exactly what you're going through. I understand. And here's how it worked for me. And that
Mm.
story that you tell them is how they're going to have enough faith to just keep going for a couple more months for
Yeah.
themselves. And that's all we're called to do.
Yeah. I think that's why I do the podcast because,
Yes.
I am at that place where I have maybe 70 listeners, but I have people who do reach out to me and tell me, thank you for talking about this. Actually, my best friend reached out to me last night and said, I just want to say I caught up on the episodes. Thank you so much for doing this. Like, this is really helping me go through this time. And like, this is my best friend. So, we probably could have had these same conversations maybe. But it was so meaningful to me.
Yes.
And I think you're right. Like, this is the point. And this is why I keep doing it, even though I don't always have the answers, is because I know it's also not just going to benefit me, because that's what it is. Like our lives are not just for us, it's for other people.
The
Um,
only way to survive this is for you to fully take in and receive that kind word as it comes in. If we brush past that,
yeah.
it becomes really hard. You have to sit in those moments where somebody says, this really helped me. And that's how now you can go do 2 more episodes, right?
Yeah.
And then we hope somebody else writes. That we have to take in the small wins. That's
Hmm.
how we survive when it's not our turn. This is what I've learned.
Yeah.
Little by little by little by little, it's going to be a day by day by day by day by day
Hmm.
experience.
Yeah. Which that's something I was also curious about, like the idea of accepting that it's not your turn. Is it something that is, kind of like, okay, you accept it and now you're good? Or is it something that you have to do regularly, like really, remind yourself of, for you and your experience, how was that for you?
Mm. I think what's happened now is that I have better strategies in place than I did back then.
Mm,
So, do I still go through experiences where it's not my town? Of course.
yeah.
That's never going to stop. But I will say at this stage, I have a better I know what to do. I know how to, and for me, a huge thing is like just doing prayer walks. I will
Yeah.
just go outside and walk around my block and talk out loud to God. I didn't do that. I don't think even when I was writing that book, that wasn't a part of my daily routine. Now
Mhm.
that's daily for me. That's how
Mhm.
I'm processing and metabolizing the emotions that I'm experiencing and also taking them to God. Right. So that strategy for me has been very helpful. Now I can sit and talk to my husband. I don't have to just hold this in by myself. I
Yeah.
can tell my best friends, like, I just have better strategies in place. So do you graduate? No. But do you have better strategies in place to navigate school? Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. That's actually a really good example of what happens in those trials, right? Because I'm thinking again of my own experience where I actually had the conversation recently with someone about being in a relationship again. And I was saying, if I'm in a relationship again, I actually don't know what I will be like because I'm so different than how I was
Mm,
before. And I now, like, I was so emotionally detached and disconnected when I was in my marriage, but I got divorced, then I got therapy, and I was doing that for 3 years, and now I know how to not disconnect from my emotions anymore.
yeah.
So, whenever I do get into another relationship, there's a good chance that I'm gonna do things very differently because I now know things about myself, and these are things that just cannot happen when
Yes.
you're not waiting, when you're not in the heart of the struggle. I mean, I'm not going to say I never would have gone to therapy before, but I never would have learned these things about myself. I mean, point blank, if I did not get divorced, just period.
Mm,
And so those are the things too that when I think about myself today, like I thank God for those experiences because I am who I am today and I'm able to um not just move forward with myself as a professional, as a friend, as a daughter, as any role that I play in my life, like it's helped me in ways I can't even count.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked a little bit about, what we need to do during the wait. Well, how we need to handle the wait. What would you say to somebody who is going through this wait for years, and it's not happening still, kind of like a bimbo, where 3, 4, 5 years in it, nothing's happening. What do we say to that?
I just think we have to have better understanding. And this is why I personally love scripture. We flip a page and we're like, look, it's over. And we don't realize that,
Mm,
there were 17 years or so in between.
yes.
For Moses, it's 40 years, 80 altogether. So it's
Yes.
like there's
Mm-hmm.
so much for Abraham. I mean, he's already waited 10 years by the time I think he has Ishmael, like the years. So I just think I just tweeted this the other day that as I go through scripture, what I'm actually convicted of is that there's often a long time between the prayer and the promise.
Mm-hmm.
And that's normal. And it doesn't mean that
Mm,
anyone's doing anything wrong. And it doesn't mean
right.
that God has forsaken you. And it doesn't mean that it's not coming. Process is a part of life and it's natural.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that kind of is what it is. I think
Yeah.
we should be more skeptical of instant gratification
Mm,
things.
yep. Normalize waiting. Actually,
Yeah,
we're not probably, we are waiting way less than they were back then. Way less
totally.
time.
Just think about how everything
Yeah.
in our lives is set up to tell you it's supposed to be instant. But
Right.
that's not the story. That again, for Christians, we should have a deeper understanding. That's not the
Yeah.
story of scripture. I
Yeah.
mean, alone, can we just do I talk about this in the book? I might. The fact that Jesus waits, didn't I say that? I think I did.
30 something
Jesus
years.
waits 30 years to
Yeah.
preach his first
Yeah.
God. That
Mm,
tells you that there is something. And I also find it very fascinating that they could have done it any which way. I'm talking about the Godhead.
mm-hmm.
And yet even God goes through this process of like being born
Right.
and then learning how to walk and learning how to talk
Mm,
and then learning how to run. And then like there must be something to the process
yeah.
of life because God didn't skip it.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. How do we show up for the people who have what we are waiting for?
I think we have to be honest with ourselves, right? About whether we can. Like there might be it just there's seasons to things. There might
Yeah.
be a season where it is more healthy for you to unfollow those accounts that make you just feel so I'm a worse version of myself. It's bringing out all those negative traits I don't want. So I just can't
Hmm.
even see it right now. That's
Yeah.
okay. For me, I have again, I just have better strategies. Like now I know if I'm feeling jealous about something, the first thing I do is go by myself with the Lord and say, I name it. I'm feeling really
Mm.
jealous about this. And then without the shame, what is it about this person's success or this person's thing that's
Hmm.
making you feel threatened? And once I name it and I'm able to understand it, offer compassion to myself, then I ask God, help me to not feel that way towards this person. I don't want that. Because I know I
Hmm.
can't like you can't bless me as I'm tearing somebody else down.
Yeah.
That's his child,
Yeah.
right? How do I live in a way where I'm again soft toward myself, soft towards God, and soft towards others? It's
Yeah.
okay. You're always gonna have like an instantaneous thought. I don't think we can control our thoughts
Hmm.
personally. Thoughts are just gonna happen, but we choose what we allow to really then sit in and stew in.
Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
you do when the thought comes? Sometimes I'm telling you, just let it pass. It doesn't even mean anything. It doesn't even mean anything. It's just like your blood pumping. A
Yeah.
thought dropped. Doesn't mean you haven't changed. Doesn't mean you haven't grown.
Yeah.
Let it go.
Things can be so amazing once we remove judgment,
Yes.
once we neutralize things that are actually very normal.
Yes.
We feel so much better about
Yes.
ourselves.
Yes.
You know, what do you do if this person is your best friend?
Mm. For me, I have to just remind myself of all the things that I genuinely love about that person. Everybody's different. For me,
Yeah.
it was much harder if it was somebody I perceived to not deserve it. It's a lot
Mm.
easier for me if I'm like, well, they are great. You know what I mean? Like, of course they're getting these great things. They are great. It's easier for me to accept. I would get very stuck when I'm like, but they don't actually deserve it. Right.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
you just have to, that's where I had to come to it. Well, maybe they forced their way there. What business is that of yours? What God has called me to is to not force my way into anything,
Yeah.
but to trust
Yeah.
what comes to me.
Mm.
Right. And so their journey is not my journey.
Yep.
And
Yep.
if it's somebody who I love, who I think is great, how do I just clap for them? And if it's something, I just want to be very clear because in my mind, I can't remember if I write this in the book or not, but my sister went through a miscarriage. We were pregnant at the same time. She
Mm.
went through a miscarriage. That was a very painful thing for her, where she was unable to be there for me
Yeah.
at all. And I understood that because
Yeah.
I hope like just a self-aware human being who also loves my sister. So we didn't talk. There was a couple months in my pregnancy. Even I remember when I found out the gender of my baby and I so wanted to tell my sister and I just didn't because I was like, she would have been finding out the gender of her baby around that time. I don't want to even scratch that wound. So I just kind of waited till she felt comfortable bringing it up. We just
Mm.
kind of did that walk together
Yeah.
and respected each other's boundaries. I think that's okay. Can't we
Mm.
say to people, you know what? Like, I love you so much. I can't be in your wedding right now.
Yeah.
I can't. It's too painful for me, but I'm so happy for you. And I want to go and I want to support you, but I can't be in it right now.
Yeah.
I think most people understand these things when we're honest about them.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually had a recent situation with one of my friends where, you know, there was a potential to, you know, date and like be with someone. And there was a lot of like fear I realized internally of like, how is this going to change the friendship and all these
Mm,
things. And I did the thing where, like you, like, I was like, let me sit and reflect on this. But
hmm
then I told her. And we were able to have that kind of conversation of like, hey, I'm feeling this way. And she was able to hear me and say, I get it. Like the same thing. And it was so beautiful. And I think it was like that honestly was also like a next level, I think, that we reached in our friendship where
Yes.
we can be honest about something that, there is a little bit of a shame about around like jealousy and
Yeah.
fear. I think for me, it was a lot of fear of abandonment just because of my other things. But,
Mhm.
you know, to be able to share that with someone and have them a not judge you and be like get it and understand and then act accordingly and say okay, what do you need? Like, do you need for me to not tell you this or to keep certain information to myself? Because even sometimes that's kind of hard to for me at least to say okay, I can't hear this right now, or maybe say this but not this. So I think it's really beautiful when you can have these people in your life who are there for you in that way that really matters and can understand. And how beautiful that you were able to do that with your sister, and I know that she appreciated that so much.
And yeah, I think we have to make space for people in the seasons that
Yeah,
they're in.
yeah, yeah. Well, we are coming toward the end, Heather, but um what is, I guess, like your final word of what we do in our wait? What can we tell the people to do during their wait?
So here's the entire point of the book.
Mhm.
It's always your turn.
Mm.
Just because it's not your turn in this one area, I want you to write down, listener, 5 places that it is your turn. And I want you to show up to those 5. That's what's in your hand right now. How do we be really faithful with what's actually in our hand? How do we live as if it matters? How do we believe that our lives really matter? What if your life actually isn't on pause?
Hmm.
I know it feels like it,
Yeah.
but what if you're actually living out your life? What if there are actually people in your circle who are dependent on how you show up to your life? How do we start engaging with what we do have instead of spending all our time looking at what we don't?
Hmm. I love that. Oh my goodness. I can't wait for everybody to hear this. Wow. Well, as we close out, I always do a segment called What God Has Taught Me. I actually started this because one of my therapists, as we were working together, she gave me a journal and she said, I want you every week to write down what God has taught you, despite all the things that are going wrong. And so I incorporated it as a part of just me being grateful for things that I've learned throughout the week. And so, what is something that God has taught you recently?
I am in a season right now where I am walking through a difficult experience for somebody else that I care about. And God is teaching me that other people don't have to go through things in the same way that I go through them. And that
Mm,
doesn't mean that they're failing in their season.
wow.
God is teaching me how to make space for all the different ways that people I love may navigate a difficult situation. And how do I show up in the way that they need me to show up and not pass judgment like we talked about before
Hmm.
on what things that maybe I think that they should be doing differently. So
Wow.
right now this week that's what I'm learning, and I love that God meets all of us individually. I'm making space for that, for God to
Yeah.
be different
Mm,
for people that I care about and not love them any less.
wow. That is beautiful. Something that God has taught me recently. Actually, I started doing a study on waiting, a Bible study on waiting. And again, the book you were talking about Moses, I started studying Moses. And so I'm at this part where the Israelites have left Egypt now and they are about to journey into the wilderness. And something that I've learned is that right before God crosses the Red Sea, they are cornered. They literally
Mhm.
have nowhere to go. And in their heads, it feels like there is absolutely no hope, and I felt that in my own experience where I don't know what to look at anymore. Like I can literally not see a way of escape. But God does a miracle. And he does a miracle in a time when there literally seems to be like no possible way out. And I think what it's reminding me of is like God is always doing miracles and
Mhm.
we can't see them because we're only seeing what's in front of us. But that doesn't mean that the miracle isn't waiting for us. And
Mhm.
so I'm holding on to that, especially in this time where I cannot see what God is doing, but I'm trusting that He is working the miracle. So, thank you so
Amen.
much, Heather, for joining me on the podcast. I cannot tell you enough how grateful I am that you agreed to do this. And I just know, I mean, this has blessed me already. So I know it's going to bless everyone listening. Everybody, check Heather out on Instagram, right? At Heather Thompson Day.
Yep.
Get the book if you haven't already. Also, she has another book. Um, it's wait, don't tell me, don't tell me. I'll see you tomorrow. I
I'll see
started
you
reading
tomorrow.
it.
Yes.
Yes. Go check out the book, check out Heather. And until next time, you guys, bye.
Thank you.